Pound of Flesh by Shembre. Chapter 15. The sticky fur of Kovu's face smelled so thickly of blood that his mind tried to convince him that he was lying at the open belly of hunted prey and not the side of a lioness, murdered in spite. Sira had knocked him unconscious. At dawn, Kovu had woken and crawled to Sarabi's side. She was cold and growing stiff. A painful roar seized him, as if someone had taken him by the throat with their jaws and was tearing at his flesh. It hadn't been a nightmare, but it was a nightmare. When he heard a noise behind him, he turned. His green eyes widened and blurred with tears. The broken-hearted look of horror on Simba's face made the king's jaw to slack. Simba's eyes brimmed with shock and sadness, as well as disgust. His legs buckled. The rising wind whipped up his mane. Nala stood behind Simba, blue-green eyes blank with disbelief. Kovu shrank up. "Sira, you are cruel. I wish I had never been born." Chipped rock came from a tight throat that throttled Kovu's words. I'm sorry." His heart thundered in his chest, and he clenched his teeth for a moment to hold back the contents of his stomach. "Sira, the outsiders, they ambushed us. Nothing I could. I'm sorry. They held me down and I couldn't help her." Simba stepped towards his mother. Kovu scuttled backwards, lowering his head. Simba nudged his mother's face, raising her grimace, frozen muzzle slightly to roost her. A spot of her blood smudged Simba's nose as he pulled away and stood staring down at Sarabi. Nala came to stand at her mate's side. Zazu fluttered down from the sky and landed next to Sarabi. "They were in the Pridelands to hunt, but they found us," Kovu explained. The muscles of his throat contracted. "Sira promised to leave Sarabi alone if I joined them. But Sarabi attacked the outsiders, so I wouldn't say yes." His heart thundered harder once he fully realized that Sarabi had died for him. Simba sat down and hung his head. His slack shoulders trembled. "Rest well, mother." Nala nuzzled him. Zazu laid a wing on Sarabi's foreleg. "She's finally with Mufasa." Slowly, Simba and Nala nodded. What were they thinking? It must be too convenient that the outsiders would have ambushed them like that. Too random. Simba and Nala could look around, taken the paw prints, pulled tufts of fur and stirred up dirt. But if their minds were already made up, they think I betrayed her. Simba's lost his mother. Nala lost the lioness who helped her through Scar's reign. Simba exiled my family after Cooper died. Look at me, covered in blood, and I'm the one here. I'm guilty. I didn't save her. And oh, what will Kiara think? I'll never see her again." Kovu closed his eyes and lowered his head onto his paws. "If I were Simba, I wouldn't hesitate to. If I get the chance, Sira will pay for what she's done. She's lived for too long. She's a waste of air, a waste of flesh, and a waste of thought." Shuddering, Kovu choked out, "Please don't make me leave. I'm so sorry. I didn't want this to happen, but it must look like I I put my faith in you. Kovu flinched at Simba's cool, steady voice. When a paw touched the back of Kovu's head, he startled. Cautiously, he looked up. Simba stared down at him. I gave you the best chance anyone could ever give you when I took you from your mother. I gave you the choice to stay in the Pride Lands or to return home because you deserved to choose. Kovu stiffened and glanced over to Nala, whose anxious gaze was locked on her mate. Was this it? Would Simba ask him to leave? Where could he go? This news would reach Zira. He pictured her smug smile, and all he wanted to do was to kill her for ruining his life. He hated nobody more than her. Now why would Simba want someone like him for a son? A son who had those kinds of thoughts. Kovu struggled to catch his breath. I'm sorry. I don't want to leave my home. Kovu, why would I make you leave? A wave of lightheadedness took Kovu by surprise. He gaped at Simba. After all this, aren't you angry? I didn't save her. Don't you think I killed her? With a sigh, Simba said steadily, though Kovu couldn't read his expression. No. I don't think you killed my mother. I'd never ask you to leave. Simba hesitated again. Cooper's death and what I did after still haunts me. I could do nothing for a son who the great kings had a different purpose for in mind. But the last thing I should do is destroy your future, Kovu. His voice cracked. I trusted you did everything you could to help my mother. I see it in your eyes. Stunned, Kovu was sure he'd misheard Simba. Hadn't he? Hadn't Simba just permanently exiled him? But he hadn't misheard. How hadn't Simba and Nala burst into a fit of vengeful rage? Simba turned his head. He gazed longingly at his mother and placed his paw on her shoulder before letting it slide off. Nala moved away from her mate and unreservedly nuzzled Kovu, so heartily that she almost knocked him over. You're all right, Kovu. I don't know what we would have done if we'd lost you both. Kovu clenched his eyes shut, as hot tears filled them. The depth of Simba and Nala's love and compassion amazed him. It really sunk in. Zira had been wrong. Sarabi had spoken the truth with her dying breath. They weren't going to turn him away. He was forgiven, actually forgiven. His parents were so unlike the outsiders. Kovu knew that there was still far more for him to learn from Simba and Nala. Nala nuzzled Kovu again, and he winced from the soreness of his wounds. Nala moved away to give him space. We'll have Rafiki look over your wounds. Nala turned to Zazu. Tell Rafiki to meet us at Pride Rock. Yes, Your Majesty. After giving Sarabi one last look, Zazu took off into the sky. Nala, Simba said, take Kovu home. I'll meet you at home after I bury Mother. Nala raised a brow. Are you sure, Simba? He nodded. A shot of dread stabbed through Kovu. I can wait. When they looked at him worriedly, he explained. The outsiders might come back. The outsiders will be too busy celebrating to bother me, Simba replied. It then looked like he was trying to smile, but he only succeeded in bringing a grimace to his face. Go home. The last thing we need is for you to make your wounds worse. But Nala, take him home. Kovu, Nala urged, please come with me. You're not well. She nudged him onto his feet. Then she looked at his face and did a double take. Kovu, your eye. What? He asked in concern. Self-consciously, he looked up, though he knew it was pointless. She was looking at the swollen left eye that Nuka had clawed. Rafiki will have something for that, so it doesn't leave a scar. But, of course, she added quickly, he'll have something for all of your wounds, just for the one over my eye especially. Kovu looked over at Simba once more. He was clawing at the ground beside Sarabi. He paused when Nala said she would send a couple of lionesses to help him. He nodded. Thank you, Nala, he said quietly. Kovu could see that the king was keeping himself together for him and Nala. Just long enough until he could be alone. Nala tapped Kovu with her tail and he reluctantly limped after her. Great kings, watch over my father. Nuka flinched when Vitani laid a paw on him. The wounds on his neck had oozed blood all night and it was worrying Vitani. Unlike the Pridelanders, they had no shaman to help their wounded. With careful tongues, the other lionesses had stayed up all night, licking the wounds Sarabi and Kovu had given them. Everyone was gathered in their den. Dawn was near. I hope Kovu gets what he deserves, Nuka gritted out between his teeth. Vitani looked up when she saw their mother standing and staring at Nuka. Vitani searched Zira's face for any sympathy for Nuka, any pity or motherly worry, but there was none. Only scorn. As she muttered something under her breath about Kovu. Her vision was so clouded by her hatred and disappointment for one son that she didn't see that her eldest cub was seriously wounded. If Simba doesn't do something about Kovu, Zira said, I'll kill that defiant, ungrateful boy myself. He's lost his way, yet he still might come around. Simba will exile him for sure, and where can Kovu go? Here. He'll come home. Simba will turn his back on Kovu and Kovu will come home. Yes, he'll be ready to destroy Simba after Simba reveals his true self. Vitani frowned when Zira slapped her paw across several small rocks, sending debris flying. The rocks bounced to the toes of several stony-faced lionesses. As Vitani listened to the rants of her mother, she recalled the ambush. Sarabi had given her life to keep Kovu from taking Zira's deal, a deal that suited him not because his family needed him, but because he wanted to wrench Sarabi away from certain death. He'd refused their call to action not once, but twice, and had preferred death over joining his real family. Although she wasn't sure who knew Simba best, Sarabi or Zira, Vitani doubted with every fibre of her body that Kovu would come home if Simba turned him away. If Kovu gets exiled, he'll just belong nowhere. But if Simba pities Kovu, trusts that Kovu was not Sarabi's murderer, Kovu will never come home, and we'll always be waiting. And between her brother and her mother, who could she believe? Kovu? That Zira had offered him as a piece of meat, and that Simba, benevolent and kind, had taken pity on him? Her mother? That Simba had snatched Kovu up, and that Kovu had been such a great opportunity that he hadn't tried to run away from the Pridelands. And now, perhaps Kovu just doesn't care about us. He'll get to be king in time. He doesn't need us to help him anymore. Though, what if Kovu doesn't know any better? What if the Pridelanders genuinely care about Kovu? Sarabi died for him, just as a mother would gladly die in Scar's name. You give your life for those that you love or are loyal to. Although nothing changes what Simba did to Scar and to us, our existence here, stewing away in our own hatred for a cruel king, would have been completely, utterly pointless if Mother is wrong. Vitani blinked her thoughts away and watched her mother again. Her stomach growled, and she remembered that they'd originally gone to the Pride Lands to hunt for their dinner. Zira muttered while pacing the den floor. "Oh, Scar, Kovu has lost his way. Show him the way back to a true path. Show him as you have shown me our path." Why was Zira so obsessed with Kovu leading them to victory? Vitani spoke up, her face flushed with anger. "Mother, we don't need Kovu to take back the Pride Lands." Zira didn't seem to hear her daughter. "Mother, we are strong. We've all trained. I can find a way to kill Simba myself. He won't expect it." Looking up, Zira shook her head. "Don't be foolish, Vitani. Would you go against Scar's wishes?" Zira paced faster. "After all, Scar told me that Kovu must avenge him, and Scar has never been wrong. That's the only way we will win. We'll fail any other way." Rolling her eyes, Vitani looked down at Nuka, and with a paw brushed back the tangled mane from his pained face. Maybe Scar's wrong this time," she said. "How dare you question Scar?" Zira snarled. She stalked over to Vitani and pressed her nose into her daughter's nose. Vitani blinked in surprise, but she stood her ground. Her eyes narrowed. "Scar's dead, Mother. He isn't here waiting on Kovu. Starving, being eaten alive by termites, suffering in the heat, wishing always that we were someplace else." Zira growled, smacked Vitani upside the head, and turned away. "We suffer for Scar. Our suffering will be rewarded." Stunned by both her mother's stubbornness and her blow, Vitani shook her head and dropped her ear against her shoulder. With her blue eyes, she followed her pacing mother. Clearing her throat, Vitani stated more firmly, "The Pride Lands will never expect an attack so soon. We all could storm Pride Rock, and enough, Vitani." Zira bristled and glared at her daughter. "The way back to Pride Rock lies within Kovu. He is the chosen one." Vitani glared back. She snorted. "Chosen one." The other lionesses growled and glanced at each other. One lioness whispered something into the ear of another, and Vitani tensed, waiting for Zira to notice her too. But Zira was wrapped up in her plans once more, continuing to mutter to herself like an anxious bird trying to rebuild its nest after a storm. Vitani looked down at Nuka. His eyes were clenched shut. His lips were curled up. How much suffering was enough? Mother'll never give up. I see it now. Kovu becomes king of Pride Rock, and we're still in exile for murdering Sarabi, and Mother will think he just needs to come to his senses. Or Kovu will become a wandering rogue, hating us for destroying his life, and Mother will patiently wait for his anger to boil up enough against Simba. If anyone is suffering from delusions, it's Mother. Mother's obsessed with Kovu, fixated on what she thinks he'll do even though he never will. We'll always be waiting for him unless someone does something about Simba. And if I have any decency within me, I can't allow the suffering of my pride to continue. Vitani brushed back Nuka's mane once more before she left his side. Mother, I'm going to take a walk to clear my head. She glanced at Zira. Kovu is the chosen one, Zira muttered without looking. He'll come back to us. Shaking her head in disappointment and frustration, Vitani walked out of the den and towards the Pride Lands. It was just after dawn when Rafiki and Zazu came to Pride Rock and told Kiara that Kovu had been injured by the outsiders and that Sarabi was dead. Her mother would be there shortly with Kovu, and Rafiki would look over his wounds. Her father had stayed behind to bury Sarabi. Several lionesses went to help the king. Zazu led the way to Simba. Kiara was still thinking when Rafiki finished speaking, still processing the horrible news that he'd delivered and what it all meant, though she did know what it all meant. The outsiders had made the first move and were willing to kill for what they wanted. She sat down heavily, and the old shaman gently squeezed her shoulders with his paw. The other lionesses gathered around Kiara. She heard one of the lionesses mutter under her breath something about Kovu organizing the outsiders to ambush the queen. "He went to go see his mother, remember? How could anyone forget that?" grumbled another lioness. Frowning, Kiara looked over her shoulder. "This has to stop. Kovu loves his pride. He didn't kill my grandmother. The outsiders did." All but one lioness looked away uncomfortably. She stared back at Kiara, lip curled. "Love is what makes you blind to his treachery, princess." Kiara turned to face the lioness, shaking her head. "No, I'm not blind. Kovu has sulked every day since he met his mother. If you've really seen him too, then you can't really tell me that he has a treacherous bone in his body. That's just an act. He's Scar's heir. Always will be. You don't see into his black heart." "He's not Scar's heir," Kiara tensed. "You know, you give him about as much credit as his mother. You've never given him the chance. You've never let yourself see who he isn't." Kiara didn't know what else to say. She looked at the pride. They avoided her disappointed gaze. Words couldn't convince them that Kovu's heart was good and that he meant well. He had been guilty in their eyes since the day he'd arrived at Pride Rock. "I don't think I've truly understood that until now. Poor Kovu, living in a pride that has never fully welcomed him." Rafiki's paw touched her shoulder again. "There will always be someone who is not on your side," he told her quietly. Most of the lionesses went into the den where it was cooler. A few stayed behind, but eventually they all disbanded. The late morning sun crawled up into the expanse of clear blue overhead, and Kiara knew it was one of those days where it was too hot to even move an ear to swat a fly away. Kiara's temper boiled inside of her too, as she waited to see the figures of her parents and Kovu. Sure, nobody could be on everybody's side, but if they only took the time to get to know Kovu. He was guilty until proven innocent, when it should be the other way around. Kovu was not Scar. He wasn't his mother either. They'd never given him a chance. Living among critical-eyed lionesses and unforgotten memories of Scar's reign, never getting away from Zira's plans. Kovu could never really relax, not even for a second. And he didn't deserve that. She wished Kovu could be more open with her. Little of what she'd learned about him had come directly from his mouth, but instead from her mother or father's. "Kiara," Rafiki said with one paw clutching his staff and the other pressed to his brow to shade his eyes. "It is too hot. Go into the den. I will wait for them." "I'm fine, Rafiki, really." The shaman smiled. "No. Go into the den. Sitting under the hot sun will not make them get here faster." Somewhere, going into the den felt like giving up. Her grandmother had just been killed. She felt the least she could do was endure the sun Sarabi hadn't gotten to see. "Have you slept, princess?" Kiara shook her head. "I was up all night while my parents looked for Kovu and grandmother." Now her eyelids were becoming weighted. She blinked hard. "Go rest. Sleep might be harder to find from now on." Kiara sighed. He was right. The level of alertness the Pride had experienced before would be nothing in comparison to life after the attack on Sarabi and Kovu. Still reluctant to relax, she nodded in defeat. "I'll be right here," Rafiki said as she moved towards the den. The next thing Kiara knew, she was opening her eyes and the den was set in the light of dusk. She sat up and looked around. Several of the lionesses were missing, and the rest had piled together near the den entrance. Half were awake, with their gazes on the den. She could just see her mother and Rafiki sitting outside. She didn't know where her father was. Then she saw Kovu and leapt to her paws. He was at the back of the den, lying on his right side. His body was covered with a ground-up, herby paste that Rafiki had applied to his numerous wounds. His left eye was completely covered in paste. His other eye was closed. She reached out and touched his paw. He jumped. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you, Kovu." She took a step back, lingering behind the herby, bitter fragrance of Rafiki's medicine. It was the unmistakable scent of dry blood. He lifted his head slightly and looked up at her with his glassy right eye. "Kiara." He then lowered his head stiffly and clenched his jaw. She laid down next to him, and her brow furrowed when he didn't say anything, and his expression twisted up into something miserable that made his heart wrench. "Are you all right?" she asked. And when she heard her words in the air, she felt foolish. Of course he wasn't all right. How could he be? His breath hitched a few times before he answered her in a strained, hoarse voice. "I fell asleep. I was dreaming and I saw Sira and..." His voice caught and he didn't finish. He turned his face onto the stone floor. Kiara crouched down. She wanted to wrap her forelegs around him, but she didn't want to disturb Rafiki's work. She licked the spots of bare fur on his face and pressed her nose into his. "Shh. It was just a dream." "But it wasn't," he whispered. He opened his uncovered eye and stared into the void. I couldn't save her. I wasn't strong enough. They held me down, made me watch." A shiver jittered down Kiara's spine. "Sira believed Simba would exile me. I told her he wouldn't, but I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure when he and Nala found me. When they found me like that, with Sarabi murdered." Kovu tensed up, continuing to stare. "The last thing I wanted was to leave my home and never see anyone again. Simba, Nala, you. I saw the devastation. I saw it on Simba's face. I didn't want to leave." As Kiara listened, she felt for him. The idea of being so uncertain of your place anywhere, fearing rejection from the ones you want to be closest to, made her shudder. She told herself that if Kovu had been exiled, she would have gone looking for him. But she wasn't completely sure that would have been possible. The world around her had just gotten a lot more dangerous. "Is he back yet? Is father back?" She shook her head. "Not yet, Kovu." She then flicked her ears. Did you just call him father instead of Simba?" Kovu blinked in confusion. He raised his head a little. "Did I?" She smiled and nodded. "You've never called him father before." Kovu laid his head back down. "He trusted that I did everything to help Sarabi. I see it in your eyes," he said. He fell quiet again. He closed his eyes, and Kiara thought he'd drifted off. she sat with him and was startled when he flinched and opened his eyes again. Is he back yet? Kiara rested her paw on Kovu's paws. I think you fell asleep, Kovu, but not for very long. I don't think he's here, she told him. Did the lionesses go and help him? Yes. I didn't want him out there alone. Kovu furrowed his brow. He said the outsiders wouldn't come back soon, but I wish I could have protected Sarabi. She called me her grandson. You did what you could, Kovu, but it was what I did. I should have made you stop me from seeing Zira. Kiara started to tear up, the expression on Kovu's face. Was this going to haunt him forever? Hearing it wasn't your fault over and over wasn't going to change Kovu's guilt unless he realized that the blame really did fall on the outsiders. She didn't mind the goop on Kovu's fur when she moved to embrace him, but when he grunted in pain, she withdrew. I'm so sorry, Kovu. Please, from now on, promise that you'll talk to me more. That you won't keep pushing me away like you do. Kiara, all I want is for you to be open with me. You rarely have been, and I know you have more in you that you keep to only yourself. Don't feel like you're alone. You're not. I want to be there for you, but you have to let me do that. She lowered her head and licked his nose again. Before she could lift her head, a tear dropped onto his face. Kiara whispered, Please, promise you'll talk to me. Although his expression was bewildered, his uncovered eye was in focus when he met her gaze. Okay, I promise. He then grunted and raised his foreleg. Come here. She ducked under his arm and laid on her belly with her nose touching his cheek. Her nose filled with herbs, stale blood, and the scent of Kovu's warm body. All that mattered at that moment was that she was able to be at his side. Kovu was still alive, and she could be there for him. End of chapter 15.